Now we can get into how to monitor it. So if we go to Minikube IP, this is the IP address on my machine, at least, that it's using to expose out the virtual machine hosting the Kubernetes. And I can turn around and go service list, and it gives me some URLs that I can actually use. Now I can click on that URL, and it will take me to the Kubernetes dashboard, which is the service. Or I can just type in Minikube dashboard, which will launch it for me. Here we go. Here's the Minikube overview of what are the pods and the state of the Kubernetes cluster that CockroachDB is running on top of. So we can see it's got the cluster init one, which was terminated because it finished, and it's got the 3 running pods, CockroachDB 0, 1, and 2. So if I go in, I can check the state of lots of different things around what's actually running. I can go in and actually look at the logs and wait for it to start. So it's quite a chatty protocol, and it will tell you any time that as the pods are actually talking to each other. So that's through the gossip protocol. If I go back, I can see this is when it was actually told to start up, so you can see the time, what it's been set up in terms of cache size, memory size, and that it's starting up. And if I look back a little bit further forward, what I should see here we go. Node startup is now complete. In this case, I'm looking at CockroachDB-0, and we can see that its status is initializing a new cluster because it was the 0 node in the cluster, so it was the first one to actually start up. It also has been given node ID 1, and internally in the cluster, this is the address that it's actually would use to connect. So that's what the SQL client actually uses to connect when it starts up. Now, if I go back to one of the other clusters, one of the other nodes, I should say, and I go again, we can see it starting up. And as it starts up, it turns around and says, I'm trying to connect to an existing node, going through the gossip. And here we go. Oh, it's a bit annoying because it's crossed over. So its node startup is now completed. It's got its node information. And we should see it's initialized as a new node, but it's joined a pre-existing cluster because it's been told to join onto CockroachDB-0. Okay, so that's that side of things. Now, as well as the Kubernetes cluster view and dashboard, which is quite useful for managing that, you also have CockroachDB's one itself. Now, because we're using Kubernetes, the ports aren't immediately exposed for monitoring side of things. So you can use Kubernetes itself to do a port forward as a way of getting access to it. So by port forward, pick a pod name. So if I put 0, and I can mark it as which port number do I want to port forward. Now that starts up in this one single thread, and it says I'm going to port forward 8080. So if I go back, now if I go to localhost 8080, we can see the cluster cockroaches cluster help page as well. So we can see again in the view all events, we can see that the node 1 is joined, 2 and 3 have created, and that I've gone and created the database foo. So you can see schema changes as well in this overview. You can see all 3 nodes, and if we go into the logs and I look for what's it, node product completed, we can see the same information. So this one, because I'm looking at node 1, which is nodes 1 there, we can see that it initialized a new cluster sort of things. So it allows me to quickly find out what's happening. It's got a nice information, so you can see runtime information, so how many nodes are in, how much memory is in use, number of SQL connections, which there's nothing at the moment, apart from there'll be some commands now, because it's now trying to view the information, because these are just SQL commands that this is viewing on the internal tables as well. So it gives a nice view as to what is happening there. Now, opening up, having a command running the port forward can get quite annoying. So what we can also do is we can tell Minikube itself and Kubernetes to expose the port as well as a node port. If there is probably a cleaner way to do this, but this is the one that I know how to do, so if anyone knows a better way, please tell me. So saying to kubectl, we're going to expose from a pod, in this case CockroachDB 0, a new service which is going to be a node port, and we're going to expose the ports 8080 and 26257. It creates them. Now it will turn around and actually generate a new virtual port from the from the Kubernetes cluster, which will be port forwarded internally to those 2 ports. So if we look at it, we can see 8080 is now being exposed as 32437, and vice versa for the SQL port for outlet 33444. So I can also see this if I went to Minikube and say, what is the service list? We can see 32437 has been exposed from the CockroachDB 0 pod, as well as 444. If I copy that in here, I can now see the exact same one that I had on localhost 8080, but now it's being exposed directly from the Minikube cluster, which is quite useful. And so on. Now, I've installed a pSQL shell. Here we go. Actually, I'll put it over there so I can actually see what the port numbers are. So when I use pSQL, Postgres SQL directly, I can now go 192.168.99. When you're using pSQL, you've got to specify a database that you're going to connect to. I'm going to connect directly to the system database. And I can now connect to the SQL port. And in this case, because we're insecure, we can just put in root, and it's insecure, so we don't need to supply a password. Now I've got a pSQL connection happening. So I can do the very similar commands that I did before. I think it was system.tables. Nope. So I could do just query any databases, any tables that I want. It's just the usual SQL interface. Again, /q to exit out of that connection. To my cluster overview, what I can see is that there was activity. That was me going on and actually running some various things as well. Okay, that's shown you installing Minikube, a Cockroach cluster on a Kubernetes cluster hosted locally inside a VM on your laptop, which is quite close to what we have in live. Next, if people are okay with me continuing, I want to show how to upgrade, so some of the admin type tasks.